Good morning. Today we are going to discuss TCP/IP communication. That means TCP/IP. Through TCP/IP, we are going to have a connection between a client and a server. For example, suppose that you have a machine. This is the server, and this is the client. A number of clients may be there. That means client number one, client number two, etc. Say client N may be there. So here this is the server, and now we are going to discuss what are the things you have to do when you are connecting to a server. What are the things you have to do in a client if such a connection is required. So for that, here the endpoint of communication for the server is called a socket, and this is the socket of this is the server socket, and this is the client socket. So initially what you have to do is you have to create a client socket. You have to create a client socket on the client side. When you are doing a program or when you are writing a program, first of all we have to create a socket using socket system call. When the socket system call is executed, then it will automatically create a socket. That means this is the end point of communication. End point of communication for this client, and you are going to create a socket. Once that socket is created, next thing you have to do is filling the fields of the server address structure. Here, this server has got an IP address. Say for example, suppose that 168.192.1.1. Suppose that the server is having this IP address, and server, suppose that it is a file server. This is the IP address and a file server may be running on a port say 6000, and that means this is the IP address, and IP address, that means it is a hardware thing, and there is a port is logical, whereas IP address is IP address, that means that every machine has an IP address associated with that. Okay, now you have to fill the server address structure. Once you want to connect to that server, then that server address, what is the server address and what is the port number, etc. Those things you have to fill up on the client side. So here, when you are creating a socket, here this is the domain you have to fill. Here the domain almost always we use this AF INET means we are using the internet, and the type is either you can have a connection oriented service or a connectionless service. If it is a connection oriented service, this is SOAK stream, that is the type. If it is a connectionless service, that means datagrams, and connectionless service is using datagrams, and connection oriented service is using SOAK stream. And if it is a datagram, here it is SOAK dgram. Here this is a connection oriented service, and this is a two-way, that means duplex mode it is working. That means server and client can communicate, and two-dimensional data communication is possible. And here this is protocol. Usually we use 0 for that. That means using socket system code, you are going to create a socket, and the domain of the socket is AF mainnet, and type of the socket is a connection oriented service, and protocol used is 0. That's the way you have created a socket. Now we have to fill the fields of the server address structure. Here, this is client side program. You are setting the client side, but the second step you have to do is you have to fill up the server address structure. Server address is having struct sock address in server address. This is sock address. It means it's a structure and it has got several fields you have to fill up. And here I am going to have an instance of that, which is server address. Server address what's in family is equal to a finite. That means on the other side for the server also the sin family field of that server address structure we have to fill up just a finite. Then we have to fill up the port, sin port. That means here for this server, that in that server, or suppose that you have a very powerful machine and it is acting as a server, there may be different servers running on that system. For example, web server, file server, database server, etc. A number of servers may be there. And here we have only one connection to that. That means physically one connection is there, but a number of requests are coming to that server, and some requests may be for the web server, some other requests may be for the database server, and some other requests may be for the file server. That means here each server is running on different ports. Okay, that means for example, suppose that in a railway station different platforms are there. Likewise here for the simple for a server only one outgoing path is there, but different ports are there, different ports. That means server family port dot sin port. That means the port you have to set. Here H2NS means host to network translation. That means all the internet or this network port is big endian. Big endian means in little endian machines low order byte is in lower address. For example, suppose that you have say 3768. So 2 bytes are there. So this is equivalent to 37 and this is equivalent to 68. This is the low order byte and this is the high order byte. So this is I am going to store it in the main memory, and suppose that this is 100 and this is 101. That means this is going this way, and if it is a little endian machine, low order byte will be stored in the lower address. That means this will be stored as 68 and 37. That means this is the low order byte. Low order byte is stored in the lower address and high order byte in the high address. But in big endian machines, it will be this is low endian machines, low endian machine, and in big endian machines, here this is like this. If this is 100 and this is 101, then 37 will be this and 68. Okay. So you in networks we are using big endian machine. So if it is not big endian, you have to convert. That's why you have H2 host to network. Host to network translation is done by H tones. Okay, that is all about big endian and lower endian machines. Now, what are the steps you have done? Initially, you have created a socket. For that, you need the domain, type, and the protocol used. Then, in the server side, you have to create the server IP address. That means here you have a socket address structure for the server, and server address you have to fill up. Then server port you have to fill up. Okay. Then these are the two things you have to do, and the family also you have to specify. And after that, connect client to the server. Connect that client to the server using int connect. here this is the socket descriptor. Here when we are creating a socket that returns a socket ID and that socket ID is passed here. Then struct a socket address star address. That means here we have created a socket address structure that we have to pass, and in the address length, the length of the address also we have to pass. That means using connect, we are connecting to the other side or server. That means initially you have to create a socket, then fill up the fields of the server address structure, and after that connect the client to the server. Then once that connection is established, then for reading data, you have to use in SD car star buffer length. That means you are just use the system called read, and here you have to pass a socket descriptor. Car star buffer length means this much characters will be read and stored in the buffer. And writing to the socket means write again the socket descriptor. Car star buffer length means some data is there in the buffer and you are going to write that into the just like your file reading and writing. Using these sockets you can have a communication between the server and the client. Whatever you want to send to the client, use write, and if you want to read something, you just have a read command. That means instead of sending and receiving, here you have to use read and write commands for on the client side. And now on the server side, what are the things to do that we are going to discuss. See, on the server side, you have to, since as I told you, this is the server and this is the client. I told you how to connect to the client. Client-side programming we already discussed. And now, same thing, as we have created a client socket, here we are going to create a listening socket. That means listening socket in the sense it is always listening to requests from the clients. That means this is the connection is initiated by a client. That means a number of clients are there. The server do not know the address of these clients, but these clients know the server IP address, and this client is connecting to the server. Okay, client is connecting to the server, and for that the server side we are going to set up the server side, and for that a listening socket is created, and again that is using socket system call. That means in socket in domain definitely that will be AFINet because we are using internet. Type is equal to soft string, that means it's a connection oriented service and in the protocol, and after that binding to a local port. That means, as I told you, a number of services are offered by a server, and suppose that you are creating a web server or a domain server or whatever server you want, then before creating that you have to you are offering that service in some port. You are offering that service in some port of the server that is binding. That means here when this socket system call is successful, it returned a socket descriptor, and for binding this to an address you need int st. That means this is the socket descriptor, this is socket address, this is the address of this and address length. Okay, now after binding this, now you have created a socket and some port is assigned to that socket. That means now listening to a port. That means now this socket descriptor is attached to a port, and now we are listening to a port means listen as the queue length. What is the queue length? That means suppose that here you have offering this, and suppose that this client is connected to the server and the server is servicing this client. That means communication is happening. And at the same time, suppose that this one is also tries to connect to this server, and some other client also wants to connect to the server, and these requests are there in the queue, and the maximum number of requests in the queue, that is defined by this queue length. That means maximum number of waiting requests. After servicing this client only, it will come to the next. That means this is a queue, and in the queue, what is the maximum number of unserviced requests? That is defined by queue length. Normally there will be 5. And listening to the port, and listening to the port in the sense, it is listening to the socket for a request from a client. Okay. And once a client request is received, then you can accept it using the accept system call. That means accept. This is again the socket descriptor. This is the struct socket address means this is the address received from the client side, and the address link also that is received from the client side. And after processing this, if it is accepted, then that means now we can send data to the client as well as read data from the client. Then for reading data from the client, you can make use of read system call, and for sending you can make use of send system call. Okay, that means for as a client to server communication, the client is initiating client is after setting up the details of the client side, it is placing a request to the server and the IP with the IP address of the server and port number, and upon receiving that request, it is accepting it. It is sending a reply back to the client. That is why the connection is established. Once that connection is established, the client can send, or it is writing data to the writing as well as reading, whereas this is reading and sending. So after doing all these things, you can close the connection. Okay, there is no need to have not to close server connection, because a number of requests are coming from different clients, but a client can close its connection. Why? So a client is always using this communication for sending data or receiving data, and after exchanging information, it can close the connection. No problem. That means after its use, it can close its connection. That is why on the client side we have in the last step in that client connection is closing the connection. Here, as a server, it is not closing. It is always listening. That means 24-hour service. It is always listen to some port for some service, and if a client request is coming, then definitely that will be serviced. Okay. So that is regarding this TCP/IP communication. And if you go through the manual, and a number of programs are already available, and you try to use that on the client side as well as server side. If you have a single system, then you have to open two terminals. One is acting as a client and the other is the server. Always use 127.0.0.1 as your address. That means local address. That means it is sending that data to itself. Otherwise, you should have another. If for testing a client and a server, client server programs, you no need to have different machines. The same machine can act as client and the server. That means client is running on a terminal and server is running on some other terminal, and client is sending data to the server. So always you should remember the address you have to give is 127.0.01. That is the same system. That means same system can act as the client as well as the server. So try to do such programs and you will be thorough with this concepts. Okay, thank you.